episode of Talking Marijuana, where we like to talk about all issues concerning marijuana, legalization, legislation, medical marijuana, and stupid stoner stories that come up during the week. So we're your hosts. I'm Barry Kramer. I am the operator of California Patients Alliance on Melrose here in Los Angeles.
And I'm Yami Bolaños. I'm the patient operator for Pure Life Alternative Wellness Center on La Cienega. And I'm also president of the Greater Los Angeles Collectors Alliance, GLACA, who's been setting excellence, a sign of excellence in medical marijuana in the city of Los Angeles since 2006. Awesome. And with us on the phone?
Hi, I'm Don Duncan, the California Director of Americans for Safe Access.
And
I'm Dan Gabriel, comedian and marijuana enthusiast.
Very enthusiastic about marijuana. So we're your hosts. We have a couple of great guests with us today. They are super lawyers, I would call them. They wear their secret identities under their clothes that they're wearing today. But we have Steve LaBelle and Aaron Lachant, and we're super happy to have you here. I think we're going to make this show this week mostly about legal issues that are going on around the country, and specifically here in Los Angeles, to kind of put a spotlight on the difficulties involved in all the legal situations. But let's start with a little legislative update. How about that, Don? Do you have a legislative update for us today?
I do. We're here in California, and frankly, not a lot is going on in the California legislature, although we are hoping against hope that we will resurrect a regulatory bill here in California. And the reason we're so excited about that right now is, of course, what's happening on the national level. And I'm sure most of the folks tuning in and listening to this podcast know already that this past week, the Department of Justice published what's really a historic memo, a memo by Deputy Attorney General James Cole. We've heard from him before. James Cole published a memo at Eric Holder's direction, of course, sort of outlining what the federal government would consider a priority when it came to enforcing federal law in states where cannabis or medical cannabis has been legalized. This, of course, is in response to the votes in Washington and Colorado last year to legalize cannabis for adult use as opposed to for medical use. And so finally, at long last, we've been waiting for some time to hear what the federal government would do, and we're really happy to see they're not going to sue. They've indicated they're not going to file injunctions like they did in California back in 1996 and 1997, or they did in Arizona in 1996. They're going to let it stand. They just outlined some criteria that they would look. And of course, this memo, if you read it, it says, of course, marijuana is a dangerous drug and it's, it's bad to have it and blah, blah, blah. But they say, given limited enforcement resources, it's not going to be a priority to enforce marijuana or medical cannabis laws in states where they have a regulatory program in place and they're vigorously enforcing it. So basically, they're telling the states, we're going to put the burden on you. You would go enforce your law and you take care of these situations. And so long as none of the criteria we list in this memo are happening, you're not going to be a priority. Now, word of caution is that they didn't say we're never going to enforce the law. U.S. attorneys still have very broad discretion. The memo says any time that it's in the interest of the department to prosecute, you can prosecute. But they did outline some things. I'm just going to read down through these bullet points in the memo and tell you guys what the federal government said, that if you do these things, you're not going to be a priority for enforcement by the federal government. And that's we shouldn't overlook the significance of that. It's really a watershed moment in federal cannabis policy. They said they're looking for preventing the distribution of marijuana to minors. That's the first criterion. Number two, preventing revenue from the sale of marijuana going to criminal enterprises, gangs, and cartels. Number three, preventing the diversion of marijuana from states where it's legal under the law and in some form to other states. Number four, preventing state-authorized marijuana activity from being used as a cover or a pretext for the trafficking of other illegal drugs or other illegal activity. Then we've got number five, preventing violence and the use of firearms in the cultivation and distribution of marijuana. Number six, preventing drug driving and the exacerbation of other adverse public consequences associated with marijuana use. Number seven, preventing the growing of marijuana on public lands and the attendant public safety and environmental damages posed posed by marijuana production. And then finally, number 8, preventing marijuana possession or use on federal property. So when I look at this list, I have to say I'm pleasantly surprised. Those are reasonable standards, I think, especially when you consider that we've come from a position of zero tolerance, where there were no criteria that would make you not a priority for enforcement for marijuana or for medical cannabis. So I'm happy to see this memo. I think it's a step in the right direction. A little bit later in the conversation, I'm going to tell you why I'm worried, but let's start on a high note. This is a really good development for the Department of Justice.
That is a good way to start it. It is nice to think of the good news first on that, because it is, again, great news to hear anything positive coming out of the federal government moving toward regulations. But as we were talking before the show started, we're a little jaded here in our
right.
and some of us in our 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th year of this fight, when we've heard things like this before, and memos have gone out before, and yet they've not been really strictly adhered to in any way, shape, or form. So
It was a joke.
we'll hope that this one.
Well, I do look at this with a little bit of a jaundiced eye, and I'll tell you why. We've actually seen this before. I mentioned we'd heard from James Cole before. This is actually his second federal cannabis memo, isn't it? His first one dates back to 2011, and if we turn the clock back a little bit further, after the president was elected, when President Obama was elected, he eventually published a memo all the way back to 2009. We refer to that as the Ogden memo. David Ogden, Deputy Attorney General David Ogden, published a memo sort of outlining the idea that the federal government wasn't going to make it a priority to enforce laws against anyone in a state where their conduct would be legal. I'm oversimplifying for the sake of brevity, of course. And when that memo was published, there was really a rejoicing around the country from medical cannabis people and regular cannabis people, too. And we really did think we'd turned an important corner with the Obama administration. And so I actually remember the headlines were euphoric. People declared victory. We actually cut out the newspaper articles and framed them and sent them out to all of our key organizers and donors at Americans for Safe Access, because we really thought it was just a big turning point. And at one level it was. So a lot of things happened in the 2 years after 2009 when that memo was published. And James Cole's first cannabis memo came in 2011. It was sort of a reaction to what happened in the intervening 2 years, and also sort of in fact, not quite 2 years between the two memos, but it was also a retreat from that. And basically they chimed in with James Cole in 2011 and said, well, we didn't quite mean to go that far. We're still going to be prosecuting people. And in fact, we know that has been the case. We've seen the largest escalation of the federal pressure on medical cannabis in history under the Obama administration. More prosecutions, more forfeitures, more intimidation from the IRS and the banking industry, and really just a very broad attack, including property owners now. We actually, previous presidents, George Bush Jr., for instance, threatened asset forfeiture. President Obama's Justice Department is moving forward with it. They're actually moving to take property away from law-abiding citizens who rent to medical cannabis providers in states where it's legal. So we saw this sort of reversal between 2009 and 2011, and that's the reason we're worried. We're worried that 2013 we have another memo. It looks great, but we really want to be sure that this memo is taking us sincerely down the path to sort of harmonizing federal and state law. And I believe a lot of that depends on what we do. We talked last week about this idea of, Sanjay Gupta or the sentencing guidelines as tipping points. And I was saying that a tipping point it's not about the news. It's not about the event. It's about how people react to it. And I think how people react to this memo is going to determine whether or not this is a watershed moment in cannabis policy or another sort of false start, if you will.
And what are the possibilities of people following this memo? Like, what is it that you expect or don't expect? The
great thing that can happen here would be for state lawmakers all over the country to step up to the plate where they haven't done it already and adopt a really sensible regulatory framework, really come up with some good guidelines, and then vigorously enforce them. Really step up to the plate and enforce them. And then, of course, from our community of patients, providers, and industry folks and what have you, then, of course, they would follow the law very carefully, and most of all, they would be respectful and discreet in the way that they operate their medical cannabis business. What I'm afraid might happen is what we saw in California in 2009, and frankly all over the country in 2009, which is this irrational exuberance, this giant inflation in the visibility, and in the size and in the visibility of the medical cannabis industry. And if we see in Colorado and in Washington and other places that same sort of carefree, maybe, if I may, thoughtless operation of the industry and expansion in the public perception, we may yet see a retreat from where we are today. And so I would certainly call on my colleagues, whether you're involved in the politics of medical cannabis, in caregiving, in the business, to really think about how your actions are going to influence the reality of what's on this page. Because the reality isn't, this is not set in stone. This is just a memo. Remember, you can't cite this in court. You can't rely on it to be there tomorrow. And so we need to be really careful now. We need to move carefully, respectfully of our communities, of our state, of our neighbors, especially those who don't believe the same we do. And if we do, we can have a best case scenario. And we'll look back on 2013 as the year things changed. And if we don't, then we'll say, oh yeah, that was the second Cole memo, and now we're looking for the third.
The second promise of nothing.
Exactly.
I don't have a lot of...
I call for restraint and wisdom in the way that we move forward with medical cannabis, because we don't have to blow up and be the biggest thing ever next year.
Yeah,
We can take this
I don't
step
have a
by
lot of
step.
faith in that. And I'm sorry to be the naysayer on it, but I don't have a lot of faith in that only because we're not really talking about medical cannabis anymore. I mean, we're talking about it along with the conversation, but the jubilation and exuberance that we're going to see in states when they pass legal marijuana, and the entrepreneurship that we saw come into Los Angeles, certainly with the limits of medical marijuana, and that was very limited. Now with really, I mean, I know legal marijuana will have limits on it, but it's nowhere near as limited as medical marijuana. And really what happens is the ancillary people that come into the business are the people that bring the most notice to it, the people that want to, bring your packaging for the legal marijuana that you have. They're not held up by anything illegal, and they want to be as bright and bold, and, the marketers are going to be huge.
They do, but there's a market force here at play, right? Because if somebody, this happened to me many times when I worked in West Hollywood at the Collective. I serve on the board of a very small collective there, and people would routinely show up with, stoner bee smile packaging and having buds and naked women and what have you. And you know what, it falls to the industry and to the movement to say at that point is no thank you.
Right.
I'm not going to have packaging
I feel that medical marijuana will say no thank you, and legal marijuana is going to say,
marijuana needs to think about it. Yeah. Because remember, marijuana is illegal under federal law and in 48 states. So this is a very tenuous beachhead of tolerance that we've carved out here with the Cole memo, thanks to years of work, both in medical and non-medical cannabis advocacy. And so it'd be a shame to squander it over some packaging or some marketing opportunities.
Well, I think you speak very wise words, but to very foolish people. To foolish people.
Well, I hope not. You never know. People evolve. And remember, we should have learned a lesson in 2011. So I hope we did.
I hope we have. We are going to take a little break, I think, right now, and we're going to come back and really go into a little more depth about the memo that's come out, the legal questions that it brings up here in Los Angeles and the situation here in Los Angeles, and we're going to talk about our Dope of the Week later on. So we have some great stuff for you coming up after this break, and we'll take a little break now. Peace.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FYI. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi everybody, Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
back. We are back with Talking Marijuana, and your hosts, Barry and Yami and Dan and Don on the phone from Sacramento, and our guests, Aaron Lachant and Steve Lubell. We were talking about the Cole memo, the memo that came out last week from Eric Holder in the Attorney General's office, and a number of the regulations that, or not regulations, but what would you call them, Don? That you listed off.
These are sort of, I guess, guidelines, if you will, for when the federal government will not make enforcement a priority.
Right, and so one of them that stuck out to me when you mentioned it earlier was that there will be no growing on federal lands, and I know that there's been a story brewing and coming more and more into the public eye about how the rimfire that's going on near Yellowstone, Yosemite,
yeah.
my bad, was caused by a marijuana grow, an outdoor marijuana grow on federal lands. I don't think there's any proof for that, but it just seems like another way of casting aspersions on our on marijuana.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a natural tag, isn't it? It's the largest wildfire apparently in California history, and so obviously somebody's going to get scapegoated for this.
Yeah, well, it would be a shame if that's the way that it goes. Aaron, do you have something that you wanted to throw in on that?
As far as the wildfire goes, listen, from what's been released publicly at this point, they don't know who started. They don't know what. They just suspect it. There's been nothing released publicly that somehow ties it to an illegal marijuana grow. And again, just thinking about it, marijuana being grown outside, I don't know how a plant growing outside is going to start a fire. And how you can determine it that the marijuana grower started the fire versus campers or somebody else out in the park. It's a tragedy that it happened, but to me, the law enforcement accusation that it was a medical marijuana grow that started this whole thing is a little misplaced without more information being disclosed.
They also said that there was lightning that day.
Lightning,
like a thunderstorm lightning. So that could have started a fire.
We've got to crack down on lightning.
If they could, they would. So that's been a story in the news this week. One of the other stories that I feel has kind of ricocheted off of the Attorney General's announcement and Dr. Gupta's apology and the CNN documentary that he did. I'm seeing in the news a lot more stories out of a lot more states concerning parents and their children being able to use this as a medication for autism, seizures, all sorts of things that they're at their last rope with on conventional medicine. And now in almost every article that I read where a parent, there's one in Utah, a Mormon woman wants her 11-year-old son to be able to use this, and they obviously can't do that legally in Utah, but they're considering traveling to Colorado now, which is going to be one of the offshoots of this legalization there. And in Arizona is going to be the youngest citizen given a recommendation card to use marijuana. I think he's 8 years old, and all of these articles refer back to Dr. Gupta and the parents saying that they had seen this and they're doing their research and they want to explore this because they've reached their end with conventional medicine. So I do think that was a great offshoot of the documentary that Gupta did, and I think it came at a very good time for the Attorney General to make his statement because it will help to ease parents' concerns about the legality of things, even though it's not a clear-cut, get out of jail free card. It does start to give people hope that this can be used as a medicine. And again, I'm not talking about legalization right now or legal marijuana. I'm strictly speaking as a medicine to be able to help save lives, to be able to help create a greater quality of life for many people. So I'm super happy about both of those events, even though they have their darker sides to them. I don't know if anybody else has.
Neither one of them are a full commitment. Both of them, the Sanjay and the memo, and they're both just flirting with what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
Well, Sanjay came out and said that the federal government hadn't gone far enough, in his opinion, that they should have gone farther, that was like no big deal, that they should go farther. I mean, he was very strong in his opinion about it. So.
And he's a doctor. He's just getting into studying now what this is. And one of the things that I take exception to with Sanjay Gupta and some of the other kind of the rolling ball of this medical marijuana being useful for autism and other childhood diseases is that they're specifically stating that they should be high CBD medicines. I agree that high CBD medicines are going to be very valuable and probably more valuable for the patients, but there's starting to be a little misconception that somehow you just need those CBDs or you can take away the elements. Marijuana is a complex plant. It's got multiple cannabinoids, CBD being one of them, THC being one of them. There's so many, and they work in concert with each other. And you certainly don't want to get your children high. That wouldn't be the point of giving them the medication. You'd want something that would keep them as level as they could be.
Alert.
But the idea that we're going to head toward, it has to be a high CBD strain, I think is a little limiting. And were we given the purview of having research done on medical marijuana, we would find that out. So I'm hoping that the Attorney General's thing will allow for research, which will give us more informed and better informed information.
Yeah, I mean, if you gave your kid, a pint of NyQuil, that would be horrible too. We find out what the right levels are.
But the thing with the parents now coming out as strong as they have, we've had Joey's mom here
absolutely.
On our show, and she's told us how desperate she was with her son. She's worked intensively with children,
other children around the country, around the world.
The world, yeah. And the desperation that a parent feels because there's nothing in the world that's helping their child, that maybe their child is even dying. I mean, to have someone like Sanjay come on and say that it was medicine. Do you know how much hope that gave people? I mean, oh my God, it's desperation. Really, you have a sick child and someone says this can help you. I mean, yeah, you're going to try it. Yeah, you want it because nothing else works, and that's what
So we've been happy in the news this week to start to see more and more articles concerning children, parents really taking this to heart, and I think it's going to be a great help for many families around the country.
Listen, these articles are important. The
it's an
article.
interesting breaking point, isn't it, about the whole children thing between cannabis and medical cannabis is, of course, that's going to be a line in the sand with the feds under the Cole memo. And yet, I think any reasonable person would, of course, embrace it for medical use. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, Aaron?
I was saying these stories are great. The Sanjay Gupta thing, the stories about people actually benefiting from medical marijuana is fantastic from a public awareness perspective, but it isn't going to fix the problem about research until rescheduling happens. And that's a fight ASA's taken on. Yeah. Don has spoken at length about it, but ASA has been the leading organization trying to get marijuana rescheduled. And until marijuana is rescheduled, the availability of research dollars and the government support for research just isn't going to be there. We have a government that just does not support scientific research into marijuana. There are people working on it independently without any sort of government approval, just doing it as an academic interest. But all of the real research on cannabis is being done overseas, which is tremendously unfortunate. There's a lot of great research coming out of Israel and the PTSD. And unfortunately, the new Cole memo, it will do nothing to help the research end of things. And just going back to the Cole memo, every article in the news has been a celebration showing this huge governmental shift on marijuana policy. Is this the signal for the end of prohibition? It's not. The Cole memo has as Don alluded to, the Cole memo has so many loopholes in it that it's just business as usual with the federal government. There's huge disclaimers all over it saying, you can't use this memo in court. So on one hand, you have the government saying, we're not going to enforce this law against these individuals if they're doing certain things, but prosecutors remain totally independent and can use their discretion to enforce federal law. So if and when the Federal Controlled Substances Act is enforced against someone who is in 100% compliance with the Cole memo, they can't hold that memo up as a defense. Nothing has changed whatsoever. I don't want to be the skeptical one here, but we've seen this before.
The DEA is just going to say, sorry, we didn't get that memo.
If you look at the actual federal court filings, the federal government has their own take on state medical marijuana laws that are not consistent with that state's court decisions. In other words, the federal government says activity which is legal under decisional case law is illegal in their opinion of the state law. So I think we're going to see a lot more of the same. They have this broad discretion to enforce when they want to do it. If there's neighborhoods complaining about a medical marijuana organization or a legal marijuana organization that's 100% in compliance with the state and local laws, the feds are still going to be responding to it. They have a track record. And I know Steve's looking to jump in. There's one more point. This new memo came out right at the same time as the DEA was issuing new guidelines to banks and armored trucks saying that they can't work with medical marijuana. Granted, they've backpedaled a little bit, saying they're going to work with them to figure out a way to allow them to work with medical marijuana providers as a means of public safety, but they're still talking out of both sides of their mouth on this issue. And if anything, it just adds to the confusion for providers as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Let me give you an example in the city of Los Angeles, at which, I'm not cynical, I'm a realist, but on August 13th, a number of dispensaries who are compliant not only with state law, but compliant with the new limited immunity in the city of Los Angeles received letters from the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Department of Justice, and the landlords indicating that there will be forfeiture proceedings if they were to continue at that location. And these are dispensaries that are state compliant and compliant with the new local law. And then we get this memo that comes out. So there's a real contradiction between what's happening in Washington to what's happening to the field.
Reality.
And people's lives, people's families are all getting caught up in this confusion. I do see a day that will settle all of that, and we'll have real laws that make sense and that are enforceable on the books. But until then, whether it's a year or 5 years or 10 years, we have people's lives that are really suffering from the confusion, from the double talk that comes out of the government. Our government should be playing much fairer with us than they
This
are.
also hurts on a subtle level because people who might have written their congressman to make some change are going to look at this and go, oh, okay, I guess it's all fine now. I don't have to do anything.
It's true.
When you look at this internationally, the International Drug Treaty, which the United States is a member of, specifically, if you look at the treaty, allows and encourages research. So in the United States, in order to get the research, we have to reschedule. By not rescheduling, you can't get the data that all sides need.
Absolutely.
And you talked about that, putting money towards investigating or research or whatever. Well, last week on the show, we had the federal government granted $1.8 million to a college in New York so that they could do a study on how marijuana makes people aggressive and violent.
In situations, between man and a woman,
Domestic
situations, So they actually gave them $1.8 million to do that.
Well, if you look at it, out of the body of research into marijuana, the vast majority of research into marijuana it's biased. It's negative. It's funded research to come up with a negative conclusion. There hasn't been any. Here in the United States, there's been very little unbiased scientific research into the medicinal properties of marijuana. And it needs to be done because it's just a plant we don't understand yet because we haven't researched it.
Fear of it for almost a century now.
The state of Washington has a DUI portion in the new medical marijuana law that has a specific amount of nanograms you can have in your system. And yet I always ask the question, what scientific study are you basing that on, saying in a specific nanogram level that person is intoxicated to drive? Because we don't have, because marijuana is a Schedule I drug, they can't do that research.
So they don't have that answer.
They don't have the answer.
So they just arbitrarily pick a number, this many nanograms, and that's it. That's
How are
what
they
becomes law?
testing? How are they testing people on the side of the road?
Well, they don't really have a field sobriety test. I think there's a company that just developed a field sobriety test. They usually pull blood. And in Washington, here's what happened in Washington. In Washington, they wanted to have many safeguards in place, and one of them was a very conservative THC level in the blood to determine impaired driving. And it's led to absurd consequences. It was a well-intentioned measure, but as a practical, it just doesn't work. And here's what happened. This is just one instance, but there was a gentleman. He was driving his car, and a woman was crossing the street. She was in the wrong. She crossed the street, and he hit her with his car. They took his blood, which had over the threshold amount of THC detectable in the test, but he wasn't impaired at the time. Nevertheless, because he was in violation of the THC blood law, that's negligence per se. So she gets to sue him and collect for damages, even though she was at fault because he was, quote, impaired under the law, even though he wasn't impaired at the time. The bar was set way too low that anyone who smokes days before could still fail that test. And it exposes, now that guy is exposed to tremendous liability because he hit a woman who was crossing the street illegally and had smoked pot 3 or 4 days beforehand.
We're going to see a proliferation of these types of cases throughout the United States.
And she was probably high.
Because if I'm not mistaken, there are, at the moment, really no cases of marijuana causing this kind of accidents, marijuana causing deaths, but if they can start to manipulate the facts like you're saying.
So in this Washington case, even though the guy wasn't impaired at the time, because the THC threshold in the law for impaired driving is so low, he was considered impaired under the law. So now, under Washington statistics, there's going to be that one case where an impaired marijuana driver hit a woman, even though she crossed the street illegally.
We don't know scientifically how much of a factor marijuana impairment there is, in at least in the state of California, that affects in these accidents. Without the additional studies, we can't get there. From a government standpoint, they need the studies in order to enforce the law. From a patient standpoint, they need the studies to know, when am I impaired to drive?
Absolutely.
It's like alcohol,
Absolutely.
A field sobriety test. If you can pass a field sobriety test, just prove that you are capable enough by the side of the road. Just have that app.
Right.
If they
We had an app last
yeah.
week that Normal put out to see if you could, drive. So you take the test, and it's like a 5-minute test. And
So we're gonna take a little break and take a field sobriety test here of our own, and when we come back, we'll let you know the results, and we'll continue talking about marijuana.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FY. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
And we are back with Talking Marijuana, and our guests today, Aaron Lachant and Steve LaBelle, two very wonderful lawyers here in Los Angeles that have really tackled some of the major problems that we've been having, and have guided us through quite a few landmines in the legal landscape. So welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us, Barry.
And let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Los Angeles specifically. We'll we'll maybe broaden this out to California, but let's talk about Los Angeles.
So in Los Angeles, two things are happening. In May, the voters in Los Angeles passed Proposition D, which is a regulatory ordinance that allows around 135 medical marijuana dispensaries to remain open.
Out of how many in the city, approximately?
The numbers vary. If you ask the city, it's probably 800 are in business, but I've pulled the tax information from the Office of Finance. Since April 2011, they've issued over 1,800 medical marijuana business tax licenses. Not all of those shops are still open, not all of them ever opened, but there were 1,800 business licenses issued over the last 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so there's two things happening in LA. The first thing is the 135, the ones who are allowed to recognize the original operators who meet these enumerated conditions. They are in the process of looking for new locations that are compliant with the distance provision. The law says they have to be 1,000 feet away from schools, 600 feet away from sensitive uses like churches, public parks, youth centers, libraries, drug rehabs. And these are very stringent zoning conditions. So the 135 who are allowed to operate, they are hustling, looking for compliant locations. And it's been a challenge. I would say that maybe only a third of them, if that, have been able to secure compliant locations.
If that.
One of the problems in Proposition D, Proposition D is an improvement. It's a great law, but one of the problems with Proposition D is that the term youth center is defined so broadly. It basically says if you're a business and you regularly provide programs and services to children, you're technically a youth center. So, the providers are having a hard time figuring out which locations are compliant because pretty much anything could be considered a youth center. McDonald's has a play place that regularly provides recreational services for children, and does that make McDonald's a youth center and a marijuana dispensary can't be located within 600 feet of a McDonald's?
And so to clarify that just a little bit, we're in a very urban setting here in Los Angeles. There is a lot of urban sprawl around Los Angeles, and almost everywhere there's either a church. It could be just a one-room little church or a major building that's a church. There could be parks, small neighborhood parks and large parks.
Pocket parks.
Yeah, pocket parks.
Yeah.
So the available space to be able to locate a compliant medical marijuana dispensary is severely limited in a large city like this, even though most people, I think, listening would say, well, hell, you're in LA. Go open up. There's so many places.
I'm looking
very
right now.
difficult.
It's very hard.
It's very
hard.
So I just wanted to clarify and for listeners how that translates.
Just right, so people understand what's happening. And then you compound, very limited real estate with finding a landlord who's willing to take on the risk of renting their building to a medical marijuana dispensary amidst the federal government's crackdown and forfeiture of landlords who do rent to medical marijuana dispensaries.
I have a solution. Ice cream trucks.
Prohibited under Proposition D. No mobile delivery services. It's creative.
But good idea.
Hey, the driver doesn't have to be stoned.
The reality of this is because of the broad definition. My opinion is you won't see that 135, that it'll be something far less than that. Because there's going to be attrition because there's a December 17th deadline for these entities to move, and it's been really, really hard, and landlords have been chilly.
So let me take a time and take on that point, that there's a December 17th limit. We have to have moved by December 17th. That's in compliance with Measure D, which was passed in May. However, the city has done nothing to move toward enforcement of Measure D. So that means that, let's say there were 1,800 dispensaries open and operating in Los Angeles before Measure D passed. That's what we're assuming. Somewhere between 800 and 1,800.
Very scientific. Somewhere between.
So if Measure D were enforced, 700 or 600 of those, 1,100 of those would have had to have closed, which would have opened up many new spaces for compliant dispensaries to move into. However, the city has done nothing to go toward enforcement, and so this search for compliant spaces is being clogged by people that should not be open and operating, and yet that date just keeps getting closer and closer, and the city isn't taking into account that there is no humanly possible way to move your place at this point.
Listen,
but that doesn't matter. It's just the letter of the law and legal.
I'm going to take the controversial position and defend the city for a moment.
Okay.
We have a new city attorney who just took office about 2 months ago. He is wrapping his hands around this problem. Basically, he has to shut down hundreds of businesses. And there needs to be a plan in place in order to do that. You just don't snap your fingers and suddenly 700 businesses are being sued in court and told to shut down. Mike Fuhrer, we've met, both Steve and I have met with the new city attorney. He has
Mike Fuhrer. Right?
Mike Fuhrer. He's and Yami was there. He has pledged to enforce Prop D. He takes it very seriously, and given the scope of what he needs to accomplish by means of enforcement, it's going to take a lot of planning and a lot of coordination on his part. So I'm not ready to jump on him yet because enforcement hasn't started yet. I think it's right around the corner. I think you got to give the guy a little bit more time. He's new in office. You have to support him. Give him a chance to implement Prop D and shut these guys down.
We do support him. That's why we went to speak to him. We did support him. We endorsed him for the elections and everything. I just think that you're right. 2 months have gone by, but that's 2 months that they ate off of my time. I'm looking for a spot right now. You can't rely on anybody. You can't rely on mapping services. You can't rely on terrain engineers because nobody has it correct. This is the biggest clusterfuck there is. I've gone and knocked on so many doors to find out what exactly is that tutoring center all about. Are they tutoring adults or children or what? And you have to do a lot of proactive work trying to find because but the thing is that this is even worse than before because now you have to defend your position according to Prop D, right?
Well, right. You have to defend your position according to Prop D, and I'll give it the really quick answer why. Because marijuana is still illegal under federal law, there is a California court decision which has been depublished, but the rationale still stands that the city of LA cannot affirmatively issue permits to break federal law that says where they can't hand you a piece of paper that says Pure Life may operate in violation of federal law at this location. They can't do that. So what works with Prop D, and the reason why Prop D is legal is because it puts the burden on you to comply with restrictions and to stay in business under Prop D. Yes, you do have to.
But we need clarity on a few
this
things.
is Don. I've got a question about that. How do we square this position of limited immunity with what the Justice Department seems to be saying that if states do authorize behavior, they're going to be perhaps better on enforcement. It seems like the feds are not as concerned about preemption as the city of Los Angeles.
Well, they were relying upon Ryan Pack versus City of Long Beach, and all that case was depublished. The theory is alive and well. Proposition D is a voter mandate. And because it's a voter mandate, you cannot change any dates within the proposition except with another voter mandate.
I just wonder why the city is so determined not to authorize when the Department of Justice seems maybe willing to do it.
Because I can't speak for the city, but I can surmise that the city wants to be able to regulate and they want to have a law in place that allows them to regulate and isn't going to be struck down by challengers. LA's unique compared to every other city in this country where because there was so much proliferation, illegal proliferation for those listening and watching, the marijuana situation in LA is a lot like illegal immigration. We had 180 shops follow the rules and open up in compliance with the law. The city enacted a prohibition saying no more, and then 800 more shops opened up in response response to statements made by the federal government.
Right.
So we have these original 135 who are trying to follow the rules, who are trying to do the right thing, and Prop D gives them that. The reason why we can't have affirmative permits is because we have this other group, the 800 who opened up illegally after the law. They're going to challenge whatever affirmative regulation is put out there. You know, they're going to challenge Measure D. It's only a matter of time before Measure D is challenged in court, and you know, I'm confident that Measure D will survive constitutional challenge. It takes into account every recent California court decision, and I think at the end of the day, Proposition D will be left standing. Nowhere else in the country have the marijuana community encountered such resistance and opposition to regulation than in LA. So that's why I think LA needs to do everything legally by the book, whereas the Department of Justice and the federal government, they're encouraging affirmative regulations. If that was done again in LA, it would just be challenged for the 100th time. These are issues that have already made their way through the courts, and they'll just come up again. LA didn't want to make the same mistake again.
It's not the federal government. It's with respect to the challenge that the city is concerned about. In theory, they're more concerned about, as Aaron bringing up, is some third party who doesn't get to play, who will challenge the lawsuits. So Proposition D, Aaron and I have been living this for a number of years now. And been at a lot of court hearings, and it's clear that that the challenge to Proposition D, in my opinion, is going to be withstand because we have been through these cases. The case law is clear, but that doesn't stop somebody from filing a lawsuit. But it's a very different terrain now because of various cases. The Riverside case that came down, giving the California Supreme Court ruled, giving the cities the ability to regulate and or ban, is a very different landscape than it was a year ago.
It's
good answer.
Yeah. I recently heard Mike Fewer, our new city attorney, on an NPR show. He was being interviewed, and he was asked the question about, enforcement of Prop D. It's been passed. What's going on with enforcement? And he said, all these letters have been sent out. We did this first initial thing. About 1,700 letters were sent out, and from those letters, they've closed maybe 50 or 60 places, and that was the end of his comments on that. And my fear with our government is that they're only telling us parts of the story. The thing that Mike Fewer didn't go on to say in that was that of those 50 that they shut down, 35 of them went and reopened somewhere, and another 35 just opened out of the blue, which gives us a net plus of whatever. And he's not saying that part of the story. He's just saying we're doing it. We started enforcement, and it's going along good. So I've been trying to be as patient as I can here in Los Angeles.
It's hard,
and many of our colleagues are trying to be as patient as we can, but it is hard when a law is passed and not enforced, and then other laws that we need to follow are enforced like that, and when we go to jail or we go to this, but the city doesn't have to follow their
It's a
laws.
tactical decision.
It's
from what we can, the rumblings that we're beginning to feel, we think that, or my opinion is, I don't know if Aaron agrees or not, and I think he does, is it's about to start. It takes a while, the way government works, to organize themselves, and I think it's going to be a multi-front assault in the city by government.
I'm hoping. That's what I'm feeling it. But I don't trust the feeling because I hear the slippery slope dialogue that the politicians are using. And
Aaron, you feel the same? Or?
I feel the same. I think enforcement is imminent. I heard Mike Fewer speak last week in front of a neighborhood meeting, and he indicated that enforcement is coming. He promised that enforcement is coming. He wouldn't go into the details because he didn't want to reveal his office's investigation techniques that would let the illegal dispensaries know how they're going to go after these cases, but enforcement is coming, and if there's an illegal...
No, it seems like no one respects the law, really, because we passed it in May 21st, and Barry has somebody that opened up across the street from him after the election.
2 months after that election.
I have somebody that opened up a month ago on the corner of my block.
And I know that particular operation will not be shut down within the next 6 months. It's not a priority. They don't even know they're on the radar yet, other than whatever.
Listen, here, what we do know is that enforcement is going to be complaint driven. So, this is a message for people in LA. If there are illegal dispensaries operating in your neighborhood, there's an anonymous line to which they can report the dispensary set up by the city attorney's office. There's an anonymous email system, and they're going to be going after the areas where there are the most complaints.
I think the neighborhood councils have, over the years, they've gotten more and more involved in this particular issue, mostly out of annoyance. But I think that they also feel, as the medical marijuana community does, that they're waiting to see, and they're going to put the pressure. I have faith in Fuhrer. I'm happy that he was elected. I supported him. I just want to goose him a little. But you're right. We need to be patient.
And then there's one more piece to the puzzle. They have many cases on their side in support, but there's one more case they're waiting on. There was a recent appellate decision came out that looked at one of LA's previous laws called 420 caregivers. It went up to the Supreme Court, and by the Supreme Court taking it, it depublished the case, meaning that case can't be relied on in future. Supreme Court of California, right. Meaning that 420 caregivers case can't be relied on in future decisions. Ultimately, the Supreme Court kicked it back down, saying, we really don't need to look at this anymore. Our decision in Riverside addresses it. We're not going to issue any further decision on this case. So now we have a case that the city of LA wants to use, but it has no precedential authority. They've made a request to the Supreme Court to republish the case. And do you know the date on when they're supposed to get the decision on that?
Don't know, but it's been over. It's going to be going on a month towards the end of the week. If they republish that case, the challenges to Proposition D are just going to get hit out of the ballpark.
Really?
If not, we're going to have to relitigate
right out of court.
Wow.
A lot of the challenges that the people who oppose Proposition D are going to bring are addressed in this case, but the problem is it has no precedential value right now. We're waiting for the court to give that ruling to republish it, and once they republish it, the city, between Proposition D, the Riverside decision, and the 420 caregivers case, the city has every tool they need to shut down every dispensary and quickly dismiss every challenge to the law.
Well, let's take a little break. We'll come back and we'll pick up this conversation and see if there are remedies on the offing coming in. So we'll take a little break here, and we'll see you after the break.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FY. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Hi, John Lovitz here. It's time to put laughter back into your life. Check out the John Lovitz Comedy Club, located in the heart of Universal Studios City Walk, Los Angeles, not Orlando. For tickets, go to thejohnlovitzcomedyclub.com.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome back to Talking Marijuana. We are here with Aaron Lachant and Steve LaBelle, two wonderful lawyers here in Los Angeles working on all the crazy stuff that's going on here in Los Angeles with dispensaries and medical marijuana. And I think you had a question, didn't you?
I had a question. So what exactly is the 420 case?
So the 420 caregivers case was a challenge to a previous Los Angeles ordinance that allowed old dispensaries who registered in 2007 to stay open. The initial trial court said you can't use that as the line in the sand in which to determine who's illegal and who's legal. But when the city appealed to the Court of Appeal ruled that, that 2007 registration using the 2007 registration to draw a line in the sand, in other words, to say who's legal and who's illegal.
The people before were legal, and the people that came after the
are
2007
are illegal. That's a valid distinction. So when the Supreme Court depublished that case, it was a real blow to the city's arsenal to shut down collectives, because that decision essentially affirms the same line drawn in Prop D. So they've made this petition to republish it and give it precedential value, and hopefully we get a ruling on it soon, because it's really going to affect how Prop D is implemented and how quickly the challenges can be disposed of.
And just to recap, you're saying that this should come in fairly soon, this decision. We're waiting on, it's not going to be like months down the road.
There's no
we don't know
time frame, but we hope soon. It's been over a month, as Steve said.
And the timeline that we're talking about that was used in the 420 case is based upon a United States Supreme Court case of City of New Orleans versus Dukes that involved pushcart vendors. So there's U.S. precedents that we're trying to use by the California Supreme Court, now handed back to the appellate court.
And those vendors were basically in the same situation where they had a date. They were the first people that registered with the city. Then there was a cutoff date.
Right. The city of New Orleans wanted to reduce the number of hot dog vendors to preserve the character of the French Quarter, and they said, early hot dog vendors, you can stay in business. Newly opened hot dog vendors, you have to shut down.
And that was from 1976. So it's
wow.
Yeah.
This isn't the first time a city's encountered this issue.
Those guys are hard to mail letters to. You never know where they are. They're always on a different city corner.
So, how do you two view the outlook for this, what we call a clusterfuck here in Los Angeles? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see reality in a real solution to this? There being a number of medical marijuana dispensaries operating legally and under city law and state law?
I think under Prop D, we are going to see a reduction in the number of dispensaries. Is it going to be 135? I think at the end of the day, there's going to be less than 135 who meet all of Prop D's requirements, but I don't think we'll ever see a time when there are going to be less than 135 dispensaries. I think the city attorney's office will be able to reduce the overall numbers, but it's going to be like whack-a-mole. One goes down, another one pops up somewhere else. Ultimately, the solution is federal reclassification, because once it's reclassified, then the city can permit medical marijuana dispensaries without fear of legal challenge, and they can be treated just like any other business. So because marijuana remains illegal at the federal law, we have to go about regulation in an indirect manner by simply, saying what we don't want and then leaving the law silent as to what we do want.
It's like we're treating the symptoms and not the disease.
Right.
Correct. And I think those that are remaining are going to have to operate very differently than they have operated in the past.
That was my next question. Do you see the landscape changing once it's the requirement of being certain distances and all those are somewhat doable? Are there other requirements in D that are going to be coming along that will make it more difficult and whittle down that number even more?
I think the operating conditions and the way the entities have been working with respect to their growers have to be very different. There's going to be a lot more accountability with a smaller number.
Transparency going on.
Correct.
And accountability to the city government, to the city, I guess.
City and to the patients.
And to the patients.
And the stakes are a lot higher now, because under Prop D, if you mess up, you lose your right to operate. So a lot more pressure is going to be on the management and operators of these corporations to make sure that they are operating in compliance with the law. Because unlike other businesses who may violate a regulation and get a citation or have to go through an administrative hearing, if a medical marijuana dispensary screws up with respect to the regulations, they're out of business under Prop D. They lose their right to continue to operate in the city of LA without being enforced upon.
It's going to be a treacherous road forward for many dispensaries. And I know that GLACA and the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance, who has a number of members in the dispensaries that are going to be at least considered to remain here in Los Angeles, also has a strict set of rules on protocol. But even that's probably going to have to be tightened up. GLACA has operated for 7-8 years. All the time now that we've had no regulations in Los Angeles, the GLACA dispensaries have been operating with their protocols, what we like to call our own self-regulating methods. But even those are, I think, a little more lax than what the city is going to ultimately ask for, and probably need to be tightened up within the community as well.
This is a good thing. The voters voted for accountability, which is what they want. This is an industry that can't be regulated in a traditional manner. So this is the best way to ensure public safety, to ensure safe medication, to ensure safe access. It takes a balance on all of those things. But at the end of the day, I think it's good policy, and it brings accountability to the providers, and it definitely has, severe punishment for providers who don't follow the rules. And that's part of the reason right now why there are so many illegal marijuana dispensaries, is because there is no deterrent in the law. With prison overcrowding and realignment, the LAPD and the threat of being thrown in local jail for a month isn't going to stop someone from opening up an illegal dispensary that acts as a front for a drug trafficking organization.
There's so much misinformation. I think now more than ever, compliant dispensaries need to come together through organizations like LACA. It's so important that they join together and share information. It's critical.
We've always thought that it was important from day one,
It's critical, and yet it's a difficult step for many to take, because this has been an industry that's been in the dark for so many years. Not specifically medical marijuana. Obviously, that's been brought out into the light, and it's beneficial for medicine and for patients. But the people that are knowledgeable about the marijuana have lived. I mean, let's not be naive about it. They've known about marijuana for a long time, before it was legal for medicine, and there's always been a way of operating that's under the radar.
Fly low and avoid the radar is what you're saying.
Fly low and avoid the radar. And GLACA and other organizations have been, no, we are legitimate. Let's show how we're legitimate. Let's show what our rules are. But it's slow coming I'll cop to it on our behalf. It's slow coming because many of the operators of dispensaries in Los Angeles have, again, been so long.
It's like herding cats. It's like herding cats.
But you are right, Steve, that there is no way to go forward
unless we're all together.
Without some unity, and it's a challenge, because the more you document everything, the more you try to operate above board to legitimize yourselves, the more you're exposing yourself to liability with the federal government, because you're no longer flying under the radar. And so there's this constant tension where you want to ensure public safety, where you want to be above board, where you want to do everything legitimately, but at the same time you also want to avoid enforcement from this government agency who says, right now we promise not to enforce you, but if we change your mind, there's nothing you can do about it.
Change your mind in the next 3 minutes. We might. So, wow.
It's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride the last 7 years in Los Angeles, and trying to regulate marijuana, medical marijuana, and bring it to the patients. I don't understand. We were supposed to be the leaders, and now we're like the laughingstock, right? Because it's so disorganized. It's a clusterfuck.
Well, it's you guys that have been trying to bring us into compliance, and we owe you a great debt for the work that you guys have put in the past half of a decade or more on this specific subject, and to have found lawyers in the city that understand the complexities of the problems, not just from a legal point of view, but from a patient point of view and from the operator's point of view, has been a real blessing to us. We've never felt that you guys were.
You guys are our heroes.
out to make the names or do whatever it was. And there's a lot of grandstanding lawyers around. So happy and very proud.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Guys, yes.
Hopefully you've shed a little light to the people out there about how complex it is here in Los Angeles, and we are just a microcosm. That complexity really radiates out into our country, and the complexity that's coming along with the laws that will be coming is going to be mind-boggling, I think. But we need to get ourselves out of this. This needs reform, and if we are headed in the right direction, and things like the Attorney General's memo and things are great to hear always. They're just heading us in the right direction.
Small steps.
We're going to wrap up today with a couple of things that we like to do on the show here. We do a Dope of the Week, and this week we have a clear winner, Dope of the Week.
There's a lot of fools. But
there's a lot of fools. It's hard sometimes to decide.
Christy
But
said
this
that
one,
medical marijuana didn't exist. Only marijuana did. That was pretty dumb.
This one is beautiful. Man arrested for allegedly firing marijuana at a jail via bow and arrow. The Green Arrow he's not, but David Wayne Jordan at least deserves credit for his creative attempt at allegedly trying to deliver marijuana to a Washington state jail inmate. His method, he tied a few grams of the plant to a hunting arrow and then shot it with a bow toward a mesh screen at the jail. He failed to hit the target, which led to his arrest. And when he was asked about what he was doing, he said he was shooting squirrels. And they then asked him, what about the marijuana on the tip of the arrow? How does that help to get the squirrel? And he, of course, had no answer for that, and he was arrested right away. So we would like to anoint him.
That's how flying squirrels are made.
No, I agree. He's the dope of the week. But let's give the guy some props for trying to help. I mean, he was trying to do something nice, I guess.
Well, was the other guy supposed to tie money to the arrow?
They don't even know. They had
It's a modern-day Robin.
He had no explanation as to why squirrel hunting required the attaching of the marijuana to the arrow, and he had no explanation of what he was doing, why he was aiming at the squirrel. But when he left, there was a civilian employee at the jail who saw his license plate and then got him. That's how he got nailed. We feel sorry for you. I hate to see people in jail for marijuana. It's a silly thing to put people in jail for, but that was a silly thing to do, my friend. That was pretty stupid.
You get to go visit what you were shooting at.
They said no one was in the courtyard.
At least he gets to see his friends.
Right? I mean,
it's true. Well, they did say
he's not a good shot.
in the article there was no one in the courtyard to receive the marijuana had the arrow reached its mark.
Maybe he was squirrel
shooting. Yeah, with marijuana. Give him each little baggie.
Maybe he just wanted the squirrel to relax before he died or something.
Well, then you have to shoot another arrow with a pipe, and then one with a lighter, or one with papers. It's really complicated.
So another thing that we like to do here is to tell you, the viewer, something that you can do concrete to help further marijuana progress in the country. And Don, you're going to give us a little something this week that people can do.
Let me invite folks listening to check out peaceforpatients.org. That's peace like peace not war, for patients, FOR. Peaceforpatients.org, where you can sign a letter to Congress, you can sign a petition, you can even get instructions for visiting your local congressman. This is a grassroots pressure campaign designed to get some federal legislation adopted to defund federal enforcement against medical cannabis, and also to help sort of dramatize and for the public this issue about medical cannabis. So there are all sorts of creative ways to participate. We just wrapped up our candy bar campaign. You can send in a picture. You can be a part of it in a very participatory way. So go to peaceforpatients.org and get involved. And if you're one of those people who don't have internet, call 510-251-1856. 510-251-1856.
Or if you don't have internet, you could just write a letter and tape it to an arrow and shoot it towards the dog.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's what we're going to tell you when you call that number.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week to Talking Marijuana. We'll be back next week with some more information and chatter for you.
Thanks to our guests
Thanks to our guests, Aaron and Steve, for coming in.
Thank you again for having us.
And we will see you next week. Have a great week.
You are listening to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Upcoming shows to the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.
Welcome to FY. It's Dimitri Young here with Robert Fick. Hey, everybody, welcome to Talking Marijuana.
Hi, everybody. Crabman's Rock and Roll Revival featuring Frazier Smith is on the air, in your hair, and going out everywhere around the world.
I'm Gary Garver, live from the John Lovitz Comedy Club.
This is the John Lovitz Vodcast Network.